Hello, I am Judith Pinero, Executive Director of AAMC and AAMC Foundation. It is a pleasure to welcome you to today's virtual discussion. We hope that you and our community of colleagues, allies, and supporters around the globe are healthy and safe. Our offices are in New York, and today I am speaking to you from Brooklyn, locations situated upon the unceded seized territory of the Lenape and Canarsie peoples, and benefited from the economies of slavery and the labors of African-descended captives. We owe our existence and vitality to generations from around the world who were brought here against their will, drawn here to escape persecution, and some that have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. We pay respect to their communities past and present. This acknowledgement asks us each to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us here today. The systemic violence and racism targeted at Black, Indigenous, and people of color is a harsh reminder of the inequities that persist in our society, particularly by the very institutions meant to protect them. AAMC condemns all violence, bias, aggression, and discrimination based on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, and religion. It is important to listen and learn together, and to also take action to make change a reality. AAMC's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access will continue to be a driving force of all our efforts. We call upon cultural organizations and the individuals working, funding, and serving them to take action to do better. We are dedicated to an environment in which all individuals are treated with respect and dignity at our programs. Each individual has the right to be in a professional atmosphere that prohibits discriminatory practices, including harassment. Our full code of conduct policy for this webinar and all our programs, as well as the outlets to make a direct or anonymous report of a violation, has been posted in the chat feature. For many years, we have been presenting virtual programming and documenting live events, all of which are accessible on our website or YouTube channel. We hope they provide actionable advice, value, and connectivity. You can also stay up to date on our programming by registering for our communications. We are grateful to our audiences for making space in their schedule to join us. I also want to acknowledge all our members here today and express our gratitude to them for their dedication and being part of our community. We give thanks to our speakers too for sharing their experiences and knowledge in today's candid and open forum. Thank you again for joining us. And now to begin our program.
There we go. Good afternoon. Judith, thank you for your moving introduction. My name is Brooke Kamin Rapaport. I'm the Deputy Director and Martin Friedman Chief Curator of Madison Square Park Conservancy in New York City. Madison Square Park Conservancy is pleased and honored to collaborate today with the Association of Art Museum Curators. Krzysztof Wodiczko and I have by now been in a number of public conversations, but I think this is our first one together on Zoom. We're looking forward to talking today. Madison Square Park and its 6.2 acres has remained open throughout the pandemic to provide a place for respite, reflection, and an outdoor site for neighbors and families and the public, those who have been sheltering indoors. The park has also been a meeting place for New Yorkers during recent Black Lives Matter protests. It's important that civic space can work and function for the needs of many communities. The Conservancy commissions distinguished artists to realize outdoor public art projects. We began speaking with Krzysztof in 2016 to realize the 39th project, a major work called Monument that opened on January 16th and was on view through May 10th, just 2 months ago. I'm going to introduce Krzysztof now, then we will show some slides, have a conversation, and then open it up to question and answers. Krzysztof Wodiczko was born in Warsaw in 1943 during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, a campaign of resistance against Nazi Germany during German-occupied Poland in World War II. He immigrated to Canada in 1977 and established residency in New York City in 1983. He lives in New York, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Warsaw. He is professor in residence of art, design, and the public domain at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. His work is represented by Gallery Lalonde in New York and Paris. Krzysztof has exhibited at major international venues. His work is in distinguished public collections, including the National Museum of Modern Art, Kyoto, the Walker Art Center, the Pompidou in Paris, and the Hirschhorn in Washington, D.C. This is an artist who is conscious that the reach of his work has long depended on the circumstances of others. He has realized outdoor public projects in cities and in municipalities with war veterans, people experiencing homelessness, families of victims of gun violence, women and children who have experienced domestic abuse, stateless individuals, and immigrants. His practice brings visibility to the invisible through immersive research, interviews, and placement in a public forum. In 1999, Krzysztof received the Hiroshima Art Prize for his contribution as an artist to world peace. And in 2014, he was honored by the College Art Association for a distinguished body of work. Krzysztof, we're speaking today on a subject that has been at the forefront of your practice for a half century, public art and contemporary narratives. Who historically do monuments commemorate and why? And how are monuments considered today? So let's first share slides and talk through your work. And then we'll show a short trailer of your project in Madison Square Park that was called Monument to give some context to the discussion. I'll ask you questions and then we'll open up for audience Q&A. So Monica, would you show the first slide, please? Thank you. Great, okay. So this is one of Krzysztof's early projections from 1986-87. It's called the Homeless Projection, Soldiers and Sailors Civil War Memorial in Boston. The monument, the historic monument, was dedicated in 1877. And to give a sense of scale, it's 126 feet high. So Krzysztof, can you describe projecting images of those experiencing homelessness onto this column?
Oh, so there were four figures of homeless people projected on each of the four sides of the lower section of the monument. On the top section, you could see here a fragment only of scaffolding with the sign that was at that time an evidence of real estate development, because the company, name of the company, Turner, was actually everywhere. That time it was very heavy winter. It was actually a New Year's Eve projection. Homeless people suffering incredibly conditions because of the freezing temperature in Boston at the time. So, you know, that was a projection. Of course, I used many projectors here, very, very small, low power projectors to really fill the space of that monument with fragments, sections of the images that made the right, the total composition of those four feet.
Okay. Thank you. Monica, next slide, please. So this is a piece that you made in 1988 for the Hirschhorn Museum for the Gordon Bunshaft building, and that we reprised in 2018. And this is called the Hirschhorn Projection. What were the circumstances of bringing it back 30 plus years later?
Oh, the occasion was very clear. It was an exhibition of artistic projects developed at that time, of the 80s. So there were lots of my colleagues that presented their work inside of the museum. Myself also, one of the projects, the Homeless Vehicle Project, which you might know and may show even here. But one of the projects that I wanted to reenact was the one that was done in 1980s on the very facade of the museum, the Hirschhorn Museum. And that time, the projection itself was very much connected with the 2 last weeks of electoral campaign of George Bush, of old George Bush, father. So in his campaign, he was talking about various contradictory things at that time. So he was against gun control, and he was also against abortion. He was talking about actually a country in which private initiative will replace public programs, which he called thousands of points of light. So here there is actually, so to exaggerate it, say we don't really need street lights, everybody will have a candle or flashlight, So, and of course, militarization of the policy at that time, it's very difficult to explain in metaphors. So I try all kinds of images, and I couldn't resist to project those two together at that time. So it was reenacted, and of course, because of gun violence, we needed to actually stop this projection in order not to make any associations with tragedies that were taking place at that time. Right. But it was there, and then it was finally reenacted again later.
Okay. The next image shows the homeless vehicle. That was first on view in 1988 at the Clock Tower in New York City. So as you do in the preparation for all of your projects, you met with people who were experiencing homelessness to plan this work. Can you reflect for us on that, realizing this work now?
There was about 100,000 homeless people in New York City at that time.
Right.
And I came from Canada only a few years. In the United States, it was actually a shock to me to see the problem that was in Canada, but not incomparably less visible and was painful. So I decided to respond to this with a project that should not exist. The function, the reason, so-called reason for which it was designed should not exist in civilized world. Yet, that was necessary. So that condition was presented through the project. The homeless people actually using this vehicle to sleep, to collect bottles, cans, to recycle, to actually do what they do. But this time with a specially designed equipment, which was like a provocation, because suddenly it became that their situation is real. It made it concrete and real, what they were doing and why they are doing things, how they live, what was the history of their displacement, how things they share with non-homeless people when they ask, whether questions were asked and so forth. So the vehicle had different functions. We don't have time to show it here, but it could be extended for sleeping position, for resting position, and also for traveling, collecting position, as it is here.
So the design of the work, of the object, was based on your collaboration, your conversation with individuals, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, actually, they contributed a great deal to criticism of earlier ideas. They derail all of my preconceptions. So as a result, we came up with something that they thought was acceptable.
Right. Okay. Alien Staff is the next slide. This is a work from 1992 to 1996. So you produced this to resemble a biblical staff. And this project was brought to people on the streets of Barcelona, Paris, New York, and Sweden. What was your goal for this work?
Well, I thought that immigrants, refugees, they have things to say. The perspective on the countries to which they arrive and through which they are traveling, and as important as the perspective on the country from which they came. So they are both critics and also people of vision, hopes for the future. So actually, our society can be measured by our openness to those people, abilities to listen to them, and also, of course, their talents in breaking and providing unsolicited kind of presentation of their own experience, even if the people don't want to hear. So providing special equipment for recording their stories and also allowing them to speak in the real time, and also point to some objects and important things that located in the lower section of each of those walking sticks, those speaking sticks. Well, they could interrupt their own pre-recorded speech. There could be all kinds of things happening between immigrants, refugees, and non-refugees and non-immigrants. All those things, that always will not be able to happen without those equipments, which I called cultural prosthetics.
Uh-huh. Okay. In 1996, the Krakow Projection, our next slide, was the first time you used moving image and sound together with video projection and speakers rather than with slides. So that was a breakthrough in your work.
It was a breakthrough because it was for the first time possibility of actual projecting motion image with sound, large scale buildings.
Right.
Plus the technology developed finally to that point. So I took advantage of this, and basically I mostly took advantage of the work I done with projects like Alien Stuff with immigrants. So I already learned how to work with people, so they create some kind of psychological conditions and technical conditions for them to open up and speak, find words for unspeakable experiences. So finally, the earlier projects with monuments that were silent and motionless, that use only slides, were replaced by video and voice, which really added completely new dimension to this work. So that was really breakthrough. It's when in Poland, in Krakow, it was part of the festival, Andrzej Wajda Festival, the famous filmmaker who invited me, running this festival, invited me to be part of it.
Wonderful.
So the people who are speaking to that projection were, it's something to do with domestic violence, with terrible things were happening at night in the city, of which nobody wanted to hear, of which nobody wanted to speak. So that was a very truth-telling, huge scale projection attended by lots of people.
Krzysztof, again in 2012, this was the next image is a proposal for the Arc de Triomphe in Paris of a World Institute for the Abolition of War.
So this proposal is related to my larger thinking about what to do with monuments that perpetuate things through generations that should not be perpetuated. The monuments that also are silent about many things, that are not saying things, they don't really tell the truth. In this case, about war, about sacrifice, about the transgenerational trauma, and also about culture of war, in which we grow up. So this structure around the monument is seen as housing, a place where the discussion with the monument itself, with all of the narratives, sculptures, inscriptions, and all of the kind of symbolic armament of this project that perpetuate certain the ideas of war, of sacrifice, and uncritically actually kind of creates some kind of phantasm of the war that leads to its perpetuation, heroic perpetuation. That discussion with it, undoing the monument of war, which is also inside of each of us. We are all war memorials in some ways because we're product of our culture. So this place of undoing a war culture, what is the project? I thought it needs to be exactly very close to the very body of this monument to make it effective.
And I know that you have often spoken of, and we can talk about this later, about unwar and projects that relate to unwar, as you say. Also, the next image is a memorial design to the abolition of slavery in Nantes, France.
Well, this you only see part of this monument. It's a very large public space along the embankment of the river.
Yes.
The river, that the embankment was a witness to slave ships that were equipped and armed and built here, departing for triangular slave trade and coming back overloaded with goods from colonies, mostly from Haiti, which was, in fact, entire Haiti was at the time, one time, a colony of Nantes, city of Nantes. Well, half of the slave expeditions, half of the French slave expeditions were actually departing and coming back to Nantes. So this is very important that city of Nantes opened a competition for the monument, the abolition of war. I was awarded, this project. I won the competition. Later, I asked my colleague, architect Julian Bonder, to join me, and he contributed substantially to transformation of my early ideas. But anyway, what you see here is only top part, and there's a huge underground passage with inscription of various dates and texts related to the history of abolitionism and the suffering of Black people and their contribution also to their own liberation. So this is like the texts are being cutting through the plate with the text through the ground and exposing also underground contact with the river, with the sound and changing level of the river, changing tides and so forth. There are also plaques here, thousands of plaques. Each of them actually has a name of the slave ship with the number of human cargo that those ships were transporting, the dates of departure and return.
Thank you, Krzysztof, for the summary of your work in the last decades. So also in 2012, you had we don't have a slide of this, but you have had projections of war veterans onto the monument to Abraham Lincoln in New York City's Union Square. And then monument was on view in Madison Square Park this year, and that was projected footage and audio of contemporary resettled refugees onto the Admiral Farragut monument. That monument dates to 1881. He was a Civil War Union admiral. So when we first discussed a project with you in Madison Square Park. You spent extensive time walking amongst the 19th century American monuments, and you were drawn to Farragut, not only because of its prominence in the park, because that monument was a collaboration with between Augustus St. Gaudens and Stanford White, the Gilded Age architect Stanford White, but also because there was an implicit parallel between the American Civil War and contemporary civil wars that displaced people globally. And I think that we also spoke about your choosing the Farragut Monument because it commemorated how the American Civil War generated a crisis that uprooted individuals and drove millions of people, soldiers, civilians, stragglers, enslaved people and free Northerners and Southerners, drove them from their homes. So could we have the next slide, please? This image was, in a sense, one impetus for you. This is the harrowing 2015 news photograph of Alan Kurdi, who was the 3-year-old Syrian child dressed in blue shorts and a red t-shirt, whose drowned body was found on a beach in Turkey. And this brought international attention to the refugee crisis. But I think the photo that you considered similarly was less well publicized, and that's the image on the right, which was of a Turkish officer cradling the small boy's body as he was removed from the shoreline. And if we can have the next slide, your response was to draw with great tenderness an image of Admiral Farragut harboring a young boy wearing a life vest. So this, just through this image, Admiral Farragut, 150-year-old bronze Admiral Farragut, was updated and recontextualized into a contemporary symbol. So that really became your opening conceptual framework for the project in the park. We have next. Do you want to discuss this, Krzysztof? This is this was the sort of setup of how the projection would function.
Yeah, this is a beautiful park, as you know very well, Brooke. And beautiful, but so very carefully designed. So this fountain here and the the project itself, it's very inspirational. But of course, those monuments are extremely, some of them are very good works of art. This one actually is one of the best, according to my estimate, my taste. So that makes the situation great, but also in some ways worse because of romanticization of war and creating enough heroic images of soldiers. It actually takes away the real dimension of war as the one that you mentioned, masses of people killed and displaced. The Civil War actually was the biggest refugee crisis in 19th century, as scholars say, but also it was the worst war in American history in terms of number of people killed and wounded per capita at that time. It will be about, maybe, I don't know, it would be very difficult to say how many people will be today if you extrapolate to the population. But anyway, it was so many people, so much sacrifice, and of course, so many refugees that I thought that it's a very good site to really make the point to actually put the refugees on pedestal rather than the admiral, who probably has seen many refugees himself. So actually the real heroes of of those civil wars, including American Civil War, but those that are happening right now all over the world, are not admirals and generals, but the refugees. The refugees, who's more than 70 million now, are displaced and crossing this planet. And the ones actually who are denied even a chance for asylum under present rules of United States government, the ones that were actually established a month ago, that actually made it impossible for many of those people to even imagine that they will ever get asylum here, so restricted. No time to discuss it right now, but it's really tragic.
Krzysztof, the International Rescue Committee estimates that today more than 70 million people are displaced as refugees. So in a sense, the 19th century bronze monument became a 21st century surrogate for civil wars and other conflicts of global instability. Could we have the next slide, please? So Krzysztof interviewed and filmed 12 individuals for this project from Afghanistan, Bhutan, Ethiopia, Guatemala, Iraq, Liberia, Mozambique, Myanmar, Somalia, and Syria, all resettled refugees to the United States. Next slide. We collaborated with humanitarian organizations. The artist and Madison Square Park Conservancy collaborated with Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services and Refugee Council USA, which is a humanitarian organization that includes the International Rescue Committee. So those organizations introduced volunteers to us and to Krzysztof to participate in the project. This is the work on view in the park, and we have other slides to also show the work on view in the park.
Yeah, it's worth imagining those people who are speaking through the monument actually could also come and join the public and see and hear themselves in this glorious, fantastic, monumental context in the center of the city, and also hearing and seeing other people's reactions and interests and focus. And that they reintegrated this probably inside of their own souls and identities and helped them to move on with their lives. But also it helped, I hope, people who are coming and see it to really come a little closer, to decrease proximity between them and the refugees. After all, this country was founded, this land was founded by the refugees. So that has to be also acknowledged, and hope it will be continuing this way. Yes.
Great. These are views of the project on view in the wintertime in the park. We also have a 2-minute trailer that we can show now.
Stateless means you are nobody. If you're about to die, nobody care. If you want to go to hospital and you are nobody, you don't have document, you don't have nothing.
When I got out of my house, at the door I saw they have written in 2 languages, means that you're going to be the next target.
At first I thought it was the worst decision I took in my life to come here, because I thought I would never make it here. I had to learn everything.
So the next thing that came to my mind is that my family is all going to die today. My mother's gonna die today. My sister's gonna die today. And so this fear of that I'm next, and my siblings and my mother are next, started rushing. And the next thing we started thinking was, we have to run, even though I was 11 years old.
I have to leave my child behind me for 10 years. 10 years. 10 years. I have to leave my child.
In Iraq, we are allowed to have guns, but we are not allowed to have camera. So I feel my camera is my gun, and I will show to the world what's going on there.
The happiest moment I have here, when people tell me, we are glad you're here.
So the entire projection, which was a continuing loop, was a 25 minutes projection. Let's talk about historic monuments today, because that's certainly a significant subject right now. So to bring energy and power today to historic monuments is to bring in living artists, living citizens, to interpret, to make an overlay, to infiltrate the past with the present. Can you talk about, Krzysztof, reflect on building ongoing permanent monuments? Are we at a time where we should even be building monuments anymore?
I don't think that this is my my mission to even entertain this question. The monuments will be built no matter what I think. So the question is, what kind, of course. So the monuments definitely should do something, or should help us to do something, or should also help us to undo something. To undo the way we became, we were built by our culture, our upbringing, that also perpetuates the word things and patterns of thinking and doing things. So how to undo oneself as a monument to one's own culture, and also how to create conditions to undo this culture, to do something that change our history books and our the way we perceive each other, the way they imagine ourselves in relation to others, and so forth. When it comes to Black Lives Matter, it's a matter of life and death to many people. What is the image, and what's the way, a chance for a Black person to actually be part of society, despite all of the claims and rights written on the paper? So the culture and the monuments definitely are perpetuating things that should not be perpetuated, but also that is what is happening right now. They are being questioned. They are suspects and witnesses to the culture of systemic racism. But to build something new, I would definitely, that's my take, as you've seen in my proposal for Arc de Triomphe, is to create supplemental structures that will acknowledge our closeness to those monuments as something that we should reject and question and investigate inside and outside ourselves, discuss it together, bring people into debate, and work on conflict transformation projects, on building better society together, unified society, but not on the basis of singing the same song, but creating healthy discourse in which truth-telling is really happening in free way, unexpected way, unexpected, unacceptable by others, still acknowledged. So that's how I see it in terms of my own practice. But also I am in some way doing it through my projections. The projections are actually giving us a chance for transmission and exchange of voices and positions. At best, if there were more monuments involved, they could speak to each other, they could argue with each other, or the monument could actually argue with itself, which it's coming. I'm working on those more dialogical projections right now, at least in my head. And that's a proposal that I made and got it along not a long time ago.
Right.
So that's how I see it from my own perspective.
So sort of following up on that, you have worked in the public realm and with monuments, Krzysztof, for decades. What first prompted your relationship with monuments? I know that you have said in public lectures and in interviews that between the wars in Poland, there are monuments. But also talk about the individuals who you bring to monuments who haven't in the past been commemorated in public ways.
So now I recall what I did say. Actually, it is not me, it's a saying.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
To remember, but it says somewhere between monuments and memorials, there is Poland.
Okay, thank you.
So that is, of course, true that in the shadows and omissions, missymbolization and misinformation and silences of heroic monuments lives the dark side of history and memory of Poland, as it may be the case with every country, and also the dark side of one's identity of citizens and residents. So especially in a time of nationalistic policies, the populistic policies, the illiberalism of Hungary and Poland, because at that time, I grew up during time of communist time. So the monuments were imposed on us. In fact, there were, yes, we live between the monuments that were actually all the decision whether they should be there or not, or who should be memorized was not in our hands. So we had to really think a lot about what is not in those monuments. What are the silences of those monuments? You know, Poland was kind of presenting itself through monuments to itself as a righteous kind of victor or eternal victim of foreign colonial oppression. You know, but it's true that, of course, there was no monuments to victims of Polish colonial past, of pogroms on Jews and Ukrainians and all of our, and also expulsion of Germans after Second World War, the largest ethnic cleansing in Europe, you know. So they're forgotten, erased from history monument memories. You know, depending on the regime, they will either impose it or erase it. So this, I think, growing on in this kind of place where everybody was an expert on monuments, for better or worse, or participating in making them, and also the place where Warsaw, where 800,000 residents were killed during the Second World War, with 80% of buildings destroyed, including all monuments and memorials. So of course, rebuilding memorials, thinking about the whole Warsaw was a war memorial, and not only for this, but many other wars before. So that is the condition in which I grew up. But of course, when I arrived to United States from Canada, I just realized that there are people here that are what Walter Benjamin called vanquished, that should be somehow projected against the history of the victors, or those who succeeded, those who disadvantaged people. 100,000 homeless people, which I spoke, was a fact of Reagan time. And so in 1986, this projection, homeless projection in Boston, was also referring to situation in Boston. So that's how my expertise from what those monuments are seeing, and to which they cannot respond and speak. That's was my upbringing, and I guess it helped me a little bit. Although I don't think you need to be born in Poland in communist time to be qualified to do something about those issues. I'm just responding to your question.
So you are giving the historic monuments voice.
What did you say? I couldn't hear you well.
I said you're giving the you're
No.
giving voice to the historic monument.
Yeah, because the monument, we were talking about people who should be memorialized, commemorated, but you have to understand the condition of the monument. Just imagine yourself standing there on a pedestal, seeing what's happening around, not being able to say a word, not making even a gesture, blinking your eye, just witnessing to things that actually may be in a gross contradiction with the very idealism in name of which you were built and put on the pedestal. But anyway, you should definitely, I don't advocate that we should put ourselves on frozen gestures exposed to changing conditions, standing there in freezing temperature. But the fact is that there is something similar between historic monuments and those who survive trauma. Those are the living monuments to their own trauma, as one of psychotherapists said.
Right.
So that is another issue we could discuss maybe another time. But it has something to do with bringing those traumatized people, giving them a chance to unfreeze themselves, to stop being silent, motionless monuments, but open up and speak and become alive and move on towards the future, knowing they cannot change the past, but they live on and move on if they can speak and tell the truth and make some change doing it.
Krzysztof, we are living in a time of a great rethinking of historic monuments, of course, including Confederate monuments as well as historic monuments where the figures who've been memorialized, largely white men who were politicians and war figures, they are literally being overturned by citizens. And while those figures are being upended physically, over the July 4th weekend, there is a call by the president to who proposed a national garden of American heroes, where figuration, very pointedly, no abstract work, no modernist work should be included. He cited the names of 31 nostalgic Americans, American figures like Davy Crockett and the Wright brothers. Also, notably, there were Black Americans included in that list, Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman. So this is a converse situation where there is a destruction by citizens of symbols of systemic racism, and also simultaneously a construction that's a political effort.
Yes.
Do you have comments on this National Garden of American Heroes? And
well, it looks like it's a action, also reprimanding and countering the genuine public process of civic actions that are directed against monuments that glorify and perpetuate racism in our history. So inviting or not inviting to this garden the monuments, the government is using them as a hostage and platform for the consolidation of its political agenda, taking them into its own curatorial custody to protect them, so-called protect them, from possibility of functioning as democratic platform for the civic acts and actions that wish to transform history towards new future. So this is very painful, I think, proposal. So, of course, if I live to the time of unveiling ceremony of this garden, I will definitely try to infiltrate this government garden with some of my projection. The secret plans that, when devised, will leave to the government secret service to penetrate. I mean, in fact,
I think that's a great answer.
Because before I speak, to add my voice, I will add my voice of protest outside of the garden, unbuilt monument, gates of the garden, the gated community of monuments. It's a history's real estate development project. So, but maybe the fact that this is happening may be seen a government's weakness. It's a desperate act of imaginary tyrant who has so far no power to stop the civic anti-racist revolt in needed revolution. An attempt to dictate, impose everywhere monuments like Alexander the Great, Stalin, or Hitler. Well, enforced by the power of the popular movement, the government retreats to its own federal compounds and gardens to celebrate the history and memory that he likes and wants. But also, it might be a dangerous sign of a further escalation of tyrannical policies to come. So anyway, it's a nightmare of what I remember from my childhood in Stalinist time.
Yeah.
Because we have to be forced to uncritically learn from the past, but not to teach it. So it reminds me, of course, what's happening today in Hungary, Turkey, Brazil, where the nationalism has been taking a firm command. So we should definitely have a right to teach the history rather than to be taught by it.
Thank you. I have one more question, and then we have many questions in the Q&A. So, Krzysztof, there are many curators listening here in this meeting, participating in this meeting. What would you like to share with curators talking about questions related to preserving or not documenting historic works, historic monuments that stand in municipalities or plazas that are adjacent to their institutions? Should museums take in these works? Should historical societies?
Oh, this is a difficult question for me, because I have the difficulties to imagine being in the position of those who are in charge of museums and institutions, but also people who are in charge of monuments in the cities. It's complicated political issue, but it looks like it's an issue that should be discussed in a larger, with the larger number of people. It's a matter of maybe electoral ballot question. It's a matter of not just consultations, but actual debates and discussions. So the process itself is here more important than the question and answer to do this or to do that right now. What has set up completely new culture of discussing, those matters. But anyway, the city itself has to be seen as a museum. And museums, especially of the big buildings in which they are official ones, they are works of art, and they are part of the collection of the museum called the city.
Mhm.
So there is also a possibility of making a link and seeing a role of the museum in a life and curatorial work related to the monuments in the city, but also on facades and buildings. So the question is how to really create collaboration across this kind of large museology, museum space, and also how to create collaboration with everybody who may have something to say and feel about particular project, and
Right.
and also discuss it. And this is the issue. I have no answer to those questions.
Okay. I think you gave a good answer, though.
Yeah, well, maybe.
I'm going to read some questions that have come in. Let's see. Okay, this is from Mike Stubbs. Hi, Krzysztof. Having spent a lifetime wanting to unmemorialize monuments, do you think we should build any more? And how about a monument to Europe as we watch its dissolution?
Well, just to extend some of the things, Mike, I'm really glad to hear to hear your voice here transmitted by Brooke, and the fact that it recalls our great collaboration in the past. I think that whether the monument is left on its site or it's removed somewhere else, it is still a place of memory, and it still could be converging point of multiplicity of discourses, and also with our help as artists and designers, meaning if we can make ourselves available to larger discussion, as give our hand to creating structures and conditions for more discussion, ongoing dialogue or discourse or argument, how to commemorate, how to remember, or how to really bring new memory, new experiences that are unfolding in present time and project them on the past, to teach the past, so to speak, what the past should learn, and also in the process learn something, what we should do in the future, so the past will not repeat itself, for ourselves and our children and future generations. So that's my answer. I think we should still do something with those sites. Now the question is what to do with completely new monuments, new monuments to new things that need to be commemorated. That I need to leave for another conversation. But there's still so much in the past to which we could speak, that I think we have lots of things to do, especially now when we see what's happening with existing monuments. That already is so interesting and exciting. We should just find our role and place in this process rather than to take a distant position.
Thank you. Okay. Oops. Sorry, one sec. Okay. Carol Eliel is asking, how do you feel about the current movement to remove a lot of public monuments as homages to now discredited heroes or public events? I think you covered that somewhat. Would you like to reflect any more on that question?
Well, there is not terms of my own thoughts, but I definitely would like to mention that there are projects happening right now that are worth our attention. For example, the Monument Lab in Philadelphia, which is really showing a methodology of making decisions with a large number of people, maybe crowds of 100,000 people are protesting against resistance to remove Frank Rizzo, symbol of brutal law and order approach against all communities, including, of course, Black people, marginalized communities in the 60s. So those, the monument eventually, the authorities of the city had no choice but actually do accept that it has to be removed. But then, the monument project, the Monument Lab project actually opened this to a large number of participants, or 20 artists first, and hundreds of thousands of Philadelphians asked to think the question, what is an appropriate monument for the current city of Philadelphia? 4,500 people shared their answers to that question on paper form. 5 to 8 of those proposals mentioned Rizzo, and more than 1,000 considered the area around the city as a ripe for reinvention. And then so the proposed monuments were addressing ideas of replacement of Rizzo statue, another group of resistance to police violence, another called attention to Black Philadelphians. So I'm just quoting what I found. It's very exciting to see that there may be many other projects like this are happening, and not many. I already discovered several, and I discuss it with my colleague, art historian Kirk Savage, all the time, with whom we wrote the statement. So he actually is in contact with some of them, and we are thinking what to learn, how to learn, what to learn from what is already happening. And it should be more accessible to various communities and professional groups, I think, including curatorial communities. Should not speak for curatorial communities because I'm not part of it, but I can imagine the role of curator is it's there. In fact, I think it was a perfect case of curatorial project, what I just did.
Right. Thank you for mentioning the Monument Lab. I think that's a good guide. Okay. Emily Markert is asking, do you have an audience in mind when you create these works? For example, who is the homeless vehicle really for as an art project?
It's that homeless vehicle is actually has become more than I even expected, a communication vehicle. It helped to homeless operators and performers, those who choose to make use of it, and also to speak to people, responding to questions. So that's the question. Why is this vehicle made? How many of them should be made? What is the function of that part? Why do you need this? And so that is the next question. Who are you? How it happened that you became homeless person? So then there is suddenly a communication between homeless and non-homeless through this vehicle. So I think the vehicle is designed for both homeless people and non-homeless people in order to meet each other, but also exchange points of view with each other through articulation of the needs of homeless person through design, and actually presenting this as something that was not designed for non-homeless people. Because many non-homeless people think, oh, I would like to have it as well. Every new object might be something I can buy it will improve my life. No, this is a completely different world, whether you are homeless or not. So but this conversation will not take place without homeless vehicle, as much as without alien stuff and other equipment that I design, those prosthetic equipments. But that was the very first equipment that actually exposed its functions and also the need to further develop itself. So in other words, very operation revealed its deficiency. The vehicle became deficient in face of what I was actually almost doing, meaning communication. That's why the media component became part of my projects afterwards.
Mhm, mhm. Okay. Joy Kestenbaum says, I saw your powerful piece, A House Divided, last winter at Gallery Lalong in New York. Can you discuss this work in the context of the Madison Square Park work and describe the current debate on historic monuments?
Well, the current events definitely are connected with that project at Gallery Lalong, because the people who are speaking through statues of Lincoln belong to completely opposite sides of divide, so evident in Staten Island. So you see, being kind of the conservative, more or less conservative people and more or less liberal people who were speaking to each other as monuments. As monuments to Lincoln. They both loved Lincoln. You know, they projected on Lincoln many ideas of their own, and you know, so they were very happy to speak, maybe stronger voice and more with greater civic kind of responsibility, sense of importance to each other. So that I can test. I tested in a gallery situation. It happened before with homeless projects, for example, in Exit Art and also in 49 Parallel, that I presented proposals for projects that should actually best happen outside. So that was maybe potential of some project that could happen outside, or not necessarily with the copy of the same statue, but with statues speaking to each other. So I don't, in that sense, there is a link, because I just hope that one day I could also do it outside of the museum. But this is also a museum piece. There are sculptures of very large scale in the museums. So the interior also of the museums are also public spaces, and they are not as different as we think to what's happening outside of the museums. As I mentioned, it's another museum, it's a city. And the large museums are also another part of the city, of the plaza or something. So I'm thinking that I'm just learning from this project for the future projects, but there is no direct link between the method of the work of the Gallery Lalong project and Madison Square Park, really, except that the issues are, of course, in Madison Square project quite much part of what's being discussed in the Gallery Lalong between the two Lincolns.
Right.
The issue of what to do with refugees is a very hot issue. In fact, both in Staten Island and also it was definitely between what the International Rescue Committee and the government of the United States. You know, there are debates, of course, sure, between security and freedom, between our moral and old statutory obligations as the United States, you know, and the present kind of self-centered, maybe exaggerated, self-centered position on our own needs inside, not really taking responsibility for what's happening in the world. By the way, that was discussed in Gallery Leon for sure. So I hope that to some degree between those two projects, people, you know, they could argue and discuss things among themselves better, and maybe just consolidate their own position, or maybe question some of their assumptions.
We have just a couple of minutes left, so let me pull one more question. So this is Ellen Frank, who is asking, is there a way of measuring impact, of knowing societal change? In the face of isolation due to the pandemic, how do we envision a new experiential way of seeing, and will we be seeing public monuments? Will your work reach those quarantined, and if so, how?
Well, the one important thing is to acknowledge that the projection of Madison Square Park was there,
Yes.
despite and against the epidemics. Despite all of the rules, actually, many people managed to see it and discuss it. I received some telephone calls, you know, or people who I was away, and they're calling each other. There were some meetings mediated by various devices. So people were still gathering. So that is maybe the monuments are part of public space, open public space. Maybe even more useful for the living under those conditions. if we develop more projects, people want to gather in parks, those monuments immersed in vegetation, and also they, you know, they are there as a part of our, you know, pedagogy, urban pedagogy. We learn history through them, not only from schools. We go to monuments to talk about the past. So why not? Social distancing, it doesn't really prevent, maybe decreasing social distance between us and the monuments in a way. So I feel they're less lonely in some ways. Well, they face people who also have difficulties to speak with their masks on. But those are just anecdotal comments. I don't have good answer to your question, honestly.
I think you gave a good answer to the question. And Krzysztof, I think all of us in the audience today are so grateful to you for speaking with great erudition and candor, as always. We learned so much from you, and one of the things that I think we can take away is that history isn't fixed, and art history isn't fixed, and interpreting history isn't fixed either, and that monuments, even those associated with longevity and with permanence and historical interpretation, aren't fixed, and that marble or bronze can be updated and recontextualized and reconfigured, especially through a vision like yours. So thank you so much today for sharing your insights with all of us. We're very grateful.
And thank you so much for Hartley for joining us in this important time. Thank you. It helps me a lot to move on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone. Thank you, Judith and Monica and the AAMC for gathering all of us together today.
Yes, I join you with my gratitude as well.
Okay, bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Monica Valenzuela,
Hi.
Program Manager for AAMC and AAMC Foundation. Thank you for joining our program today, and a special thanks to our speakers for sharing their experience and expertise with us. A recording will be available on our website, artcurators.org, and our YouTube channel shortly. Please help support our capacity to continue programs such as today's event by making a donation today. A gift of any amount will have a direct impact on our work. Thank you, stay well, and join us again soon.